Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Hello and welcome to the Why the Long Face. Today we are hitting this ep dry. We're actually not drinking any beer.
I forgot about that.
Because it's a daytime. We're doing a daytime recording. We're fitting it in, we're squeezing it in.
I feel wretched.
You feel wretched for being straight.
I think there's something wrong with me.
Right. So today, what are we talking about?
So the topic du jour, as
Yes.
they say in France, they say today's topic in France, is there a gender gap in depression? And what we mean by that is depression more likely in one gender than the other? Is it likely to manifest itself in different ways? Or could there be different causes? So we're going to get into dodgy territory in terms of differences between men and women.
Why?
And,
Why is it dodgy?
I don't know. It can be though, can it?
People can because genders can be equal but different, right?
Oh well, that's what I think. But I'm a gammon. I'm a old.
You're
white
so
man, so
automatically defensive about.
I'm a little bit
the
defensive
subject.
about saying, just in case I sound.
Is that because you're a man and you deep down you're just biased against women?
It might be, or it might.
Why
sound
do you hate
like that.
women so much?
I don't know. I loved Nanny.
You love Nanny's breast.
All I can remember, that is my first childhood memory, is the warmth of the bosom that I only truly loved.
Anyway, I think what you were asking me is there any difference to start with between female depression and male depression, right?
That's it, pretty much, in a nutshell. And what do you think?
My experience is that the core features of depression are the same in both genders. Depression looks the same in women and men. That's my
in terms of the
take
stuff
on it.
we've talked about before, loss of appetite, loss of libido,
all the core
early morning
features.
waking, not taking pleasure in things.
Right. The content of your thought might be different because context is different, but the problems with lack of energy, lack of pleasure, low mood, and all the other things that go with it.
So, for example, if you did one of your tests on one of your clever scales that you talk about, you think they would work for men and women equally effectively?
Well, I don't just think. I know that all our what we call psychometrics they're not specifically tailored for one gender or another.
Right.
Unless you're talking about a specific context like postnatal depression.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, where it's useful to have a special scale for that because it's a special context.
Got it. Absolutely.
But the other question was, is the prevalence different?
And I know it is, and you're going to tell me how different it is.
Yeah, so women are twice as likely as men to develop major depression.
An obvious question from me is as following. Is that because men are getting depressed as often as women but not reporting it, and women are more able to express depressive feelings and therefore they're being diagnosed more than men?
Right, so some experts believe that both genders are in fact equally affected by depression, but women are more likely to be diagnosed with the disorder. Going against that is the evidence from community surveys, which don't rely on the differential rates at which they might present for help, right? But even then, there is an argument that even when you've got a researcher asking you all the right probing questions, men might be either less willing to admit to it or less in touch with changes in their mood than women, because women are socialised, arguably, to talk more about feelings.
Do you think they're socialised or wired?
Socialised.
Really? So our brains are pretty much the same. It's just...
I do believe that, yeah.
Right.
But it's certainly argued that, and I believe this is probably true, depression can express itself in other ways in men through substance misuse, alcoholism, or even aggressive or violent behaviour.
Which kind of masks the issue? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, or perhaps it's just the way that the culture allows men to express their distress.
That's that is definitely an episode all on its own.
I mean, it's much more acceptable for a man to show his distress through hitting the bottle.
Yeah,
that's all the movies show us.
It's horrible, isn't it? That just due to lack of understanding and social conditioning, that people can suffer so much unnecessarily. Anyhow, this one is about women, and just quickly, I'm quite interested to read that the rates of seasonal affective disorder, again, which we'll cover in the last episode of this season, and bipolar disorder are also more prevalent.
Yeah, we'll wait until the night's draw in. Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I like it. The night's drawing in and get cozy.
I hate it.
Okay.
Move along.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, that touched a nerve.
Yeah.
But and also chronic depression, which I think is pronounced dysthymia. Is that right?
Dysthymia.
Dysthymia. Sorry. Are
Yeah.
all reported twice as likely in women
women.
than men.
Yeah.
Which actually kind of makes sense, really. Cool.
Yeah. All right. So overall, I would say that the evidence is in favour of women being more vulnerable to depression and getting it more often than men, right? But the size of the gender gap, okay, we can debate. But
Okay.
I think that overall, putting everything together, we can assume there is a gender gap.
But
in
it is
depression.
quite a controversial thing for you to say that that women are more vulnerable to depression, and I think you're putting that down to social conditioning largely.
So I would say there are two main threads of explanation for the gender gap. One is to do with the unique stresses that women are exposed to. Differences in gender in how much they react to stress. Stress reactivity.
Got it.
Sometimes I'm much more reactive to your belligerence when I'm tired. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
When you turn up and expecting to be fed and etc.
And to have notes and a script and to start immediately as I'm chowing down. Yeah. Sometimes
So-
you accept that.
Okay, so community surveys find that women are more likely than men to say they're under stress. That doesn't mean necessarily that they are more under stress, but they're more likely than men to say they're under stress. So taken as read, women are exposed to more stresses than men. And then other studies suggest that women are more likely than men to become depressed in response to a stressful event. So that's
Got it.
stress reactivity. So we can explore those two theories in a bit more detail if you like.
Definitely. So just to be clear, and I think you've made it yourself clear as usual, I think you're saying that there are several theories which we're going to explore, one of which is that women, by the nature of the world, are exposed to more stresses that are likely to cause depression, such as maybe abuse in childhood, and we'll talk about that later. And secondly, they are likely to express feelings of stress better than men, even if they have the same level of stress as a man. And there also seems to be a third thing, which is how they react in ways that might lead to a depressive outcome.
Yeah.
Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
So we'll talk about those things. We will come back at the end and talk about hormones as well. But let's kick off. So the different stresses theory, right? So traumatic experiences, especially early in life, can have a lasting effect on the brain. They can affect the stress response, the cortisol response. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Everyday experiences can also take their toll. So these two things combined. So women are more likely than men to be caregivers, taking care of young children, elderly parents, or both. So that would be a chronic low-grade stress. They're more likely to be victims of child sexual abuse, adult sexual assaults, and domestic violence.
yeah.
Right. There's also women are on average poorer than men. So that and we know that poverty is a risk factor for depression. It's certainly a risk factor for stress. I'm thinking about single mothers with young children, and they have a particularly high rate of depression. That's been shown.
But what about other things that have chronic stress that typically men are exposed to? So I'm thinking of people maybe in the armed forces, in the police, fire brigade, etc. That also have that what you'd call
They
chronic.
have. That's true. They have stresses unique to them, or more that are more common in males,
Right.
and that's why I think we're going to devote another ep to that.
Yeah,
But let's stick to
I
women.
suppose
So-
you'd say that there's more women who are giving care to people than there are soldiers and police.
Well, these are the that's right.
Yeah.
Right. So
Cool. Okay.
So no one is saying that men don't incur stress, but the theory is that women are under more stress cumulatively and altogether. So we're giving some good examples there. I mean, I just wanted to add unequal power and status, which is, I'm not about to get on a soapbox and talk about the patriarchy, but we do know that women are more likely than men to live in poverty, have decreased access to community and healthcare resources, and this is often a symptom of the fact that they have less power and status in many societies.
I mean, that's just fact. That's just fact and figures. You can prove that with numbers, right? There's nothing political about that statement.
No. Yeah. So that then causes feelings of negativity, low self-esteem, and lack of control over your life. That's the theory. So that again is making you more vulnerable to other stresses that come along, and work overload. So women work outside the home and in the home, as we've just said. They're more likely to be carers. They're more like they have the challenges of single parenthood more often. They're often working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and so on. And of course, the stress of caring for children when you don't have sufficient support to do that. And then there are the specific situations like pregnancy and postpartum that we'll come to later. So that's the kind of first part of the stress kind of hypothesis, that it's types of stress. The second part is stress reactivity.
So before we go on to the second part, can I just be clear? Are you saying that simply because the way society is created, a lot of stressful type responsibility is put on women often, i.e. being a single
That's
parent,
all you can conclude from that. Yeah.
And it does make an awful lot of sense. So the way society is made up and the way that men and women have their roles leads to these kind of stress.
So it's all about role expectations. Yeah.
But are you saying they're
and
exposed
differences
to...
in power, perhaps?
Yeah,
status.
exactly. Are you saying that they're exposed to different types of stresses which are likely to go down a depressive route, different types, and more of that type of stress?
I think the implication is there's more that they're exposed to cumulatively to more stress, but I wouldn't venture to say that the particular stresses that they have are particularly more depressogenic than a guy who sees his mate blown up in Afghanistan or whatever. You can't. I think get into dangerous ground if you start saying, women are exposed to stresses that are more depressogenic, but they're just. The argument is they're exposed to more stress for the reasons I've given.
Got it. I think you've been very clear. That's really. I like the way depressogenic. Was that a new word?
Yeah,
love it.
More like to generate depression. In other words, right?
Depressogenic.
So then let's go on to different stress reactivity. The two main theories that I picked out on. One is that women are more likely to ruminate over events than men. That's quite hard to take for a ruminator like me.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of female characteristics.
Thanks, man. I don't mind.
No problem at all.
I'll
Of course
that.
you don't. No, that's a compliment. You have a lovely chest. Well, I mean...
full lips?
Yeah. Full lips, silky skin.
Are you coming on to me?
Well, I didn't want to do this on air, but frankly, no.
That's not the first time, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, so I think women are more likely to ruminate over events than men do. Well, that's been shown by research.
I think that's controversial.
I think it's controversial. I ruminate a hell of a lot. I know you do.
Yeah.
But we are, I suppose, talking about generalities here. So we're trying to explain a difference at the population level between men and women.
And but again, are you saying nature, nurture? You're going on the nurture side, I think. Or you were before. But
I'm not
different.
necessarily coming down on either side for that. And as you know, I think that most mental phenomena, whether they're psychiatric or normal, healthy processes, are part genetic, part upbringing.
It's very funny. I mean, I've got a son and a daughter, and so I've got just 2 data points to talk about, frankly.
Yeah.
And they did, I think, respond to stress in different ways. And I think my daughter does ruminate and think and work out what happened and try to put a logical pattern, a logical model around what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas my son tends to blunder through or just ignore it. And these are just 2 human beings out of 7.5 billion, but there does perhaps seem to be something in it.
Although he's changing now, isn't he? He's become a bit more vocal about such things.
Yeah. I think what I'm saying, that's right. He has. I think what we're saying is the natural male reaction seems to be something's bothering me. I'm just going to carry on. I'm drinking 5 pints, and that seems to be helping.
Yeah.
Shit, I feel terrible in the morning.
But that observation does not help determine whether this is nature or nurture, does it? Because you will have reared him differently.
Yeah, exactly.
To your daughter, possibly.
Exactly. And you do that unconsciously. You try not to, right. But I think you do that unconsciously. Interesting debate, maybe for another day.
Well, it is an interesting debate. So, okay, so that is one theory, rumination theory. The other one is activity levels. This surprised me. But I thought there was the inference that it was really just one study that I found was intriguing, that lack of exercise might explain the gender gap in depression, in that women might be too busy doing all the things we've mentioned to actually get regular exercise, whereas men might be, and they may be in more sedentary roles on the whole at work.
Women?
Than men.
Oh, is that the theory?
So physical activity is known to boost mood in people with depression, right? And it's known to be a good stress buster and therefore prevent depression as well.
So is there any evidence to say that women as a whole in the population are less active than men?
Yeah, that's what they found.
Wow.
And they found that was an independent factor in explaining, or it was associated with depression.
That theory sounded absolutely whack when you first told me, but I'm getting it.
Yeah,
It's possible, eh?
and I have to stress this is, probably needs replicating, and obviously there's a chicken and egg problem, because when you're depressed you're less active.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of stress level theories. So more stress and increased sensitivity to stress, so we say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big one, which everyone, I think, the man in the street thinks would they straight away reach for the hormonal explanation. I don't know what you think, but
Well, I tell you what,
most people think about that, don't they?
I don't know too much about hormones, but is it true factually that obviously we know about the hormonal monthly cycle of women, but
Yeah.
is it true that there is more changes in hormones in women than men generally?
Well, yeah. I mean, they have cycling of menstrual cycle, obviously, and a proportion of women will have something that's much more serious than the kind of brief blues and physical discomfort that is associated premenstrually. Some people will get premenstrual depressive disorder.
Right.
And
does that disappear?
That's an obvious difference between women and men straight away.
And this a depression that may be associated with hormonal changes that occur as a result of the menstrual cycle, are they therefore, do they produce depressive symptoms and depressive episodes that are also cyclic in that?
Yeah,
same
that's what I'm
monthly?
saying.
So people can be depressed for also severe depressive symptoms just for a few days in every month. Is that?
Or a
That's
week.
amazing.
Or a week. Yeah.
Wow. And do they get to the point where they can't function for
Yes.
that week?
Yeah.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
So the correct term is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which actually does respond quite often to treatment with an SSRI, antidepressant.
And do you have to take the SSRI permanently?
Yeah, sort of
Because of the lead time?
prophylactically. Yeah.
Prophylactically for 3 weeks and
Well, no, you just take it ongoing.
yeah, because of course as we discussed in the antidepressants episode, these things take a while
To kick in, and also it's not great to be stopping and starting any medication like that.
So when we talk about the hierarchy, which goes anxiety, depression, psychosis, could it get to the stage where there's periodic psychosis, which is in line with the hormonal
With the menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
It has been recorded, but it's
Wow.
not common.
Right.
So that's very rare.
Wow.
So then we come on to pregnancy, which is the other obvious difference between men and women, is that they can get pregnant. I mean, and as much as you'd like to get pregnant, Ollie,
I'd love it.
Where's the fetus going to gestate?
Well, there's no womb.
Cardboard box.
I've literally no womb, but I'd love to feel special. And apparently it's very good for your hair. Certainly when my wife was pregnant, her hair was shiny and lush. I mean, it's always very nice.
And her bosoms were full, obviously.
Her bosoms were fuller. Yeah, God, we really
No,
are
she
two
had
old
that. She had
blokes,
that
aren't
pregnant glow.
We really are two old blokes. Her skin was
That's
beautiful
ridiculous, isn't it?
as well.
But I think that's fine. So anyway, dramatic hormonal changes occur during pregnancy, and these can affect mood.
They certainly can.
But not just that. There are it's a big deal dealing with pregnancy, especially if there are problems in the relationship. Because women need to feel secure in their pregnancy, right?
Right.
But if they don't have a great relationship with the father,
Yeah.
that's gonna make them more prone.
I think there's one thing that we can be very insensitive towards when women are pregnant is the dramatic visual changes in the body, which men find. Well, I found 50%
visual changes.
Well, they get a big tummy.
Oh, I see. They become self-conscious. That affects the body image.
Well, exactly where
Yeah.
I was coming to,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
men look at that, and I looked at my wife when she was pregnant, and I thought she looked extra specially beautiful, and also I was just like fascinated by
Yeah.
the changes in her body. Typical bloke. God,
Yeah.
this is amazing.
Yeah.
And also, I thought she looked wonderful. But I can imagine with people who are sensitive to body image, they could almost feel that looks grotesque.
Nah, well, maybe. I hope not, but yeah, it's probably it may be. It may be some. It would be particularly important, perhaps, for women that are excessively preoccupied with their body image.
Right.
Someone with borderline eating disorders, for example. That I
Right.
could imagine that
Got
would
it.
be particularly difficult. And of course, there are imposed lifestyle changes, aren't there, on you from being pregnant. When you become heavily pregnant, and it becomes very difficult to work. For some women, that's not going to suit them. They'd
Yeah.
rather be at work.
Also, it's the chronic not being able to move around. If you're pregnant in the summer, as my wife was, you're too hot all the time, and it's just a pain in the arse.
Pain in the
frankly.
bum.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
or whatever. Yeah. So then, of course, we have to consider the situation where the pregnancy is perhaps unwanted or unintended. And then finally, an interesting one, which is stopping antidepressants, because some women who become pregnant have a history of recurrent depression,
Of course.
of needed antidepressants. And sometimes stopping an antidepressant without medical advice is the wrong thing to do.
Should you stop taking antidepressants when you're pregnant, or does it not affect the baby?
It needs to go on a case by case
Really?
basis.
Okay.
Yeah. On the whole, antidepressants are best avoided in the first trimester. It really just it's all about weighing up the risks versus the benefits of continuing to prescribe,
So put it this way: if you
or
felt,
in fact balancing up the risks.
yeah. So if you felt that a patient was not likely to have a depressive episode for coming off the drugs for a first trimester, which is 3 months or whatever, you would probably recommend it.
Look, I mean, one example might be someone who has had very severe depressions and not being able to function, and you feel there's a very high risk of them going into a severe depression if they stop. Then the risk of going into that depression might be higher than continuing with the antidepressants.
Understood. Yeah.
Okay, so
Should we talk about puberty, by the way, if we're talking about hormones? Or are we still talking
well, I
pregnancy?
suppose we skipped that, but
Yeah.
so the evidence suggests that the gender gap develops from puberty onwards. From puberty, the prevalence is twice as high in women,
And pre-puberty?
and no difference pre-puberty.
Ah,
but then
so?
depression is very rare pre-puberty.
Yeah.
I guess the obvious difference there is that women go through the menarche. They start to menstruate,
Right. Not that their body changes more than
and
a
their
boy's
body
would.
changes, and
Their
that
body
and
shape changes
their
more
body
than a
shape
boy.
changes. You puppy fat, that kind of thing. That can affect self-image and so on. It's also the time when you're, but this affects both genders, of course. You're thinking about what your role is in society. Or your role in your peer group.
Yeah.
Figure out who you are, kind of personality. you've
And as
got.
you become an adult, it becomes overwhelming. It could become
And you've got
overwhelming.
huge peer pressure quite
Yeah,
often.
yeah.
So if you do get, one of the risk factors for developing eating disorders is this sort of bit of puppy fat you get in
Right.
early puberty, often
Yeah,
in girls, which then goes, but it can lead to serious image problems if it's not addressed properly.
Yeah, my daughter's
And parents
friends.
got a lot to say about.
Yeah.
Got a lot of influence over this stage.
Yeah, you've got to be hugely sensitive to this, and I can overhear my daughter's friends talking about this. I'm so fat. I wish I was thinner, and you're just like
And at this point, it's important to say that eating disorders are, of course, much, much more common in women than men, and low weight is associated with depression physiologically.
So that could definitely be a factor.
We know this because if someone develops anorexia nervosa, controlled weight gain leads to an improvement in mood, independent of all other factors.
Right.
So there's a strong link between depression in women and eating disorders. So, yeah, moving on then, because we were at pregnancy, most people will be aware that postpartum depression affects between 10 and 15% of women in the West.
Just quite a lot. Oh, you say in the West.
Yeah.
Is it more prevalent in the West?
It's more prevalent in the West.
That's interesting, actually. That's got to
Well,
be
it's
relevant.
certainly lower in prevalence in. I always pick out the example of Hong Kong because there is a tradition there for the family to basically invade your home.
Oh my God. Very
your in-laws and everyone. No, but seriously, it is expected of you to go and take on all the household chores while the postpartum, basically. And it is thought that is one of the explanations for a much lower rate of postnatal depression in that society.
When I think of postnatal depression, it just is such a horrific thing. Imagine the symptoms of depression, and then overlaid on that is an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of stress, and the expectation from everybody around you that you should be the happiest woman alive.
You should be a natural caregiver from the word go.
Yeah.
No matter how exhausted you are, no matter if you've got breastfeeding problems or you had birth complications or an exhaustingly long labour, you're expected to just bond with the baby just like that.
Very, very difficult.
Take on all the relationships. So no,
I remember looking at my son for the first time, held him in my arms, and he was about 2 minutes old, and I looked at him and felt nothing, and I felt absolutely terrified that I was a terrible father. Imagine the mother feeling that, and the mother, all the expectations on the mother.
Bonding takes time, doesn't it?
I didn't know that bonding took time, and for a woman to feel that must be absolutely awful, and then to be depressed, it just makes me shiver. The suffering that some women must go through.
But thankfully, 90% of women don't. So yeah, but it is a potential explanation again for the gender gap.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
it's a really good question. It's a brilliant question. I've slightly overplayed this question. It's kind of average at best.
Better be good now.
And I think I've found the cure. No, if a woman's suffered postpartum, why can we call it postnatal? Why do we have to call it postpartum now?
You can call it postnatal.
Thanks.
Either will do.
Honestly, I just got used to postnatal, and then
just
everyone goes
let it
postpartum.
go, man. It's fine.
What is it? What's the difference?
Well, there's no difference really.
Stupid having two different words. Postnatal depression for one of her children before, or maybe two. You, I imagine, would try and take some steps with her second, third, fourth baby to do some preventative measures to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, normally, you know, if she doesn't, she should. But normally, she would. The GP would be aware, and services would be alerted. Health visitors should. Certainly the midwife and the health visitor work together, and possibly with a psychiatrist. From a perinatal service that would advise on that.
And if you're the partner of a woman who's given birth and you're wondering whether there's a postpartum, let's call it postpartum, be trendy, postpartum problem, what are the things to look out for? Why is that trendy? I mean, isn't postpartum...
Move on, man. Listen,
sorry, I am getting a bit obsessed with that.
So I should just point out, though, that it's not just a previous history of postnatal depression that would increase your risk. It would also be a history of any depression at any time.
Got it.
Would increase your risk, and that's also the case for depression associated with pregnancy.
That makes a lot of sense because it goes back to your theory of vulnerability and B, stressor.
Yeah, and there was a myth for a long time that women who were pregnant didn't get depressed, and we now know that if you look for it, you find it, and a lot of women do get depressed in pregnancy. But and then, of course...
you haven't even answered my brilliant question.
No,
you did ask my brilliant question. My second one, not quite so good, but even so. If my partner's had a baby, and I'm worried about postpartum depression, what are the kind of things I look out for? Are they similar things, the same things that you would in any depressed person?
Yeah, you would look for the same core symptoms of depression, but warning signs are things like interrupted or poor sleep, difficulties bonding with the child, anxiety or feeling numb, crying more often than usual, inability to care for the baby, thoughts of suicide like you get in any major depression, and sometimes thoughts of harming the baby, but they would tend to be
fantasies as opposed to something that would be
not active or serious plans. If those develop, that would be an indicator of something more serious like puerperal psychosis, which we're not really covering in this episode. That's about 1 in 1,000 women. It's much rarer. Horrible,
terrible.
Well, so we know. So I hope that answers the question. But
it does. Of course it does, Doctor. You always answer the question.
So then we've got, of course, the menopause and the perimenopause.
Oh God, there's another word. What the hell is perimenopause?
When hormones change again. or can fluctuate erratically. But there's of course, a big drop in levels of estrogen around this time. But it's also, interestingly, often a time when the children have left home to go to university, and there's what they call an empty nest syndrome as well.
So this is your cumulative theory coming
biological
along.
and social things going on.
Got it. By the way, what is perimenopause?
Well, peri just means around the menopause, so before, during, and after. So it's the transition, which is actually a process and takes some time. It's not a single event.
Well, I suppose it's a little bit like beginning menstruating when you're in puberty. It doesn't suddenly happen overnight, as it were.
So most people who experience bothersome menopausal symptoms like the hot flushes...
Bothersome?
Well, I was going to say bothersome, yeah. Well,
Nice.
that's probably... is that understating it? I'm sure it's sure it's irritating and unpleasant. But most women do not become depressed during the menopause. But there are certain factors that increase the risk.
I think what is really interesting, you made very clear, but I want to say it again, is that this sort of cumulative idea that you could almost it's a little bit Black Mirror to think you could put a score on what your vulnerability is and what scores your stresses are. But if you are going through some kind of biological change, which is not insignificant, be it puberty, menopause, or particularly pregnancy, with additional stressors, and actually having a baby is incredibly stressful. Whether it's a joyful event, which of course it is, it's still stressful. Yeah, like going on holiday can be stressful. That does explain quite brilliantly, really, what could be the differences between men and women and prevalence of depression. Yeah. So that's been quite an eye opener for me. You've got more.
Well, just to say, other risk factors apart from stressful life events. History of depression at other times.
That makes sense, yeah.
Interrupted or poor sleep. Weight gain or higher BMI. Menopause at a younger age, younger than expected. Really? And menopause caused by surgical removal of the ovaries, like a total hysterectomy or something.
Do you think women suffer from this thing that most men don't, which is there is now a point in my life where I can't have children or I can't have any more children, and can that make you feel introspective and sad, actually, that there's something that's really important in your life, i.e. the ability to reproduce, is gone? Whereas with men, it as we know, can...
and that's just going to completely depend on the individual, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, some women are going to say, no, never again, one's enough.
Yeah.
Two's enough, or whatever.
Yeah. Or I'm glad I'm no longer having periods, actually, I suppose.
Or, yeah. I mean, I suppose I can't imagine that any woman would just shrug it off and carry on. There'll be a period of adjustment.
I think so, almost mourning. I would have thought.
Yeah, I would have thought so. And just for some women, that would trigger depression, I guess. So should we do a summary?
I think we should do a summary. Yeah. We sometimes forget, and then we kick ourselves. We're quite cross with ourselves if we don't do a summary.
I'm very cross with myself, yeah.
Do you want me to try?
Yeah, you're good at this.
Well, I am, but I've had to absorb a lot. You've been on form today, Doc. You've given me a lot of data.
We've both been on form, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I've enjoyed this one.
Maybe because I was worried dry more often.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe
but that's impossible, of course.
It's impossible in the evening because I can't function without having a little bit of the old ethanol in the old bloodstream. So what I've learned is this: I've learned that biologically, and the brain-wise, there's from a brain perspective, little difference, but we can't ignore the difference in least reported cases of depression are higher, significantly higher in women in the West and around the world. I've learned that there's the cumulative effect of stress, and that interestingly, women, due to societal reasons and just the way that we're set up, suffer from different stresses than men do, and more stresses than men do potentially. And there is also this reaction to stress, which again might be different in women than it is in men, and might result in more depressive symptoms. And then overlaid with that are hormonal changes, which may be additive in terms of additional stresses, which also might make a difference. And it's explained to me quite a lot, I think. Have I missed anything there?
No, man.
Nice one.
I think we should leave it there.
I think we should. I enjoyed that.
Yeah,
that was
see you next
good.
time. Hey, thanks for joining us on Why the Long Face. As ever, we're here to inform, hopefully, and entertain, but we're not here to give you medical advice. There is, however, information on our website, whytlf.com, that's whytlf.com, about where to get help. See you next time.